like you're in a thriller, heart goes pound, pound, pound. Ghostly figures, they can get so bitter. Sure you want to enter, you can turn back now. You don't know where I've been. What's going on inside? Where the monsters like to come alive, come alive. Do you really wanna know me? I'm really not that cozy. It's up to you, so you decide, you decide. Would you love me up my words till the coffin's in the dirt? Try to break me like a curse, you know that will never work. I'm a little bit absurd, I like dancing on the verge. Anyone can love a pretty little mansion, but could you love a haunted, haunted house? Or could you love me now? A haunted, haunted, I'm a haunted house. A haunted, haunted house. If you're too scared, get out. A haunted, haunted, I'm a
Cyberblade. Seek the light in darkness.
got so hot, I forgot what I should have thought of before. Sure ain't easy for you to let go of the rules, cause that's so much fun. Are you loving the feeling? It touch me, are you in it? Don't say what you're seeing, but typical. Messing around with it, mix it up, go with it, fuck with it, flow with it, please let it go. Oh no, think I did it again. I said a few things that I shouldn't have done. Well, bittersweet melody when I dance on your fly, cause I know what you don't. It is me you adore. How does it feel to breathe when you're dead? They've never seen you out of your bed. Cut to the bone, it's broken, I bet. How sad. How does it feel to breathe when you're dead? They've never seen you out of your bed. Cut to the bone, it's broken, I bet.
Bite us. Bite us. Bite us. If you must. If you must. Bite us. If you must. If you must. Bite us. If you must. If you must. If you must. Bite us.
see you from behind. You can hear me in your mind. Run so fast as you can go. Time will catch you before you know. Are you afraid of the dark? Are you scared? You know, I am you. I'm back. I control you just as in a game. But don't try to fight me back. You can't break me. Try it, and you shall see. I'm back. Boom.
How you going, Soul Power? Yeah, it's good stuff, isn't it? That was just a no copyright sounds Halloween song mix. I chucked it on the last time I streamed actually, but I really enjoyed it, and it's a good kind of hour-long thing, so you get good variety in there. That's just kind of how I roll. What else am I gonna play? What else am I gonna play? Mozart? I don't know. Any recommendations? Do let me know. But if you might have seen from the title that the treaty principles bill is, I think, at least from a rhetorical point of view, dead in the water. Based on the rhetoric that you see from every other political party in Parliament, bar ACT, it doesn't look like it's going anywhere. Now, do I think that's the right thing to happen in this situation? No, frankly, I was very blunt just a few days ago actually, and I'll quickly find it and pull it up. This was pretty much what I said, and this was more or less addressed to Winston Peters, to be fair, or at least the more broadly speaking, NZ First. Just bear with me. I just came to mind to actually read it out because it didn't quite get the engagement I thought it probably deserved. Just based on sometimes when I go on big rants, sometimes they just don't they just don't pop off. If I come to the quote tweets real quick, I should find myself pretty quickly. Here we are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that out, chuck it on to that. There we go. Very quickly, the 5150 show says exactly Māoris wiped out a race, the Maori Oris And Matthew reckons more volume, please. Alrighty, we can do that. Let me know if that's a decent improvement. Sometimes I have trouble monitoring the microphone volume with my current setup, but that's alright. So yeah, this is what I wrote, and so it was basically in response to Winston Peters saying the bill is fatally flawed in its construction. There are no treaty principles. Now, of course, if you've followed me long enough and you've heard me discuss this topic, you'll know that I fundamentally agree with that. That the Treaty of Waitangi has no principles. So as I wrote here, I said, it is objectively true that on February 6th, 1840, no treaty principles existed. They did not exist a decade later, nor a century later. The treaty principles are nothing more than an ideological creation set in motion in the 1970s and realized in the 1980s. Should they exist? No, but do they exist? Technically. If you ask someone with a basic understanding of the treaty principles what grants them power, they'd likely respond, the treaty. However, it is legislation more so than anything else that grants them power. One could argue more power than the treaty itself. As Winston Peters well knows, removing this legislative power the principles wield is the most appropriate step forward as far as the Treaty of Waitangi is concerned. However, I must be frank. If that is not achieved in such a manner that is just as, if not more difficult to overturn than President Show's national referenda to be, I worry deeply for the future of this country. If Winston Peters and New Zealand First are not confident they can deliver such change in such a manner, I would encourage them to do one of two things. 1. Throw their support behind the Treaty Principles Bill, granting New Zealanders the opportunity to vote for this change. Of course, that would be reliant on National also coming to the table, but Winston Peters and David Seymour ganging up on Luxon makes that more likely. 2. Propose a compromise. New Zealand First will support the bill, but the Referendum Act desires will have 3 options to choose from, not 2. Support the proposed Treaty Principles Bill, oppose the proposed Treaty Principles Bill, or delete any and all reference to the treaty principles in legislation and all the other things where that would be appropriate. Now, would I rather we had no treaty principles? Absolutely. Should there be treaty principles? Not at all. However, this bill takes a decades-long desecration of our founding document and protects it for generations to come. That is something I can get behind. I am done with race-baiting grifters leveraging the so-called power of the treaty principles to obtain power, wealth, and influence. I am done with academia lying not only to those who go through the various stages of our education system, but the wider public, where they put on their expert cap and demand that we embrace racial separatism because the principles say so. I'm done with the tangata whenua or tangata tiriti nonsense. We are alike in the most important way. We are all New Zealanders. The law should reflect this. Respect between people regardless of their ancestry should reflect this. And every aspect of life in this great nation should reflect this. If the only way to truly achieve that is to vote in favour of the Treaty Principles Bill, I most certainly will. Because when I go to sleep the night I cast that vote, I will be telling myself one thing. That I put New Zealand first. Now, of course, that's all reliant on New Zealand First's kind of way of going about this issue not being something that is able to be solidified for at least several decades of generations, without dramatic changes like a supermajority in Parliament or a referendum overturning those changes. I just, at this point from what I've seen, I don't have the confidence any such change that Winston Peters and New Zealand First are proposing in this area would not be able to be basically ignored and overturned within a week of a Labour government coming into power. So yes, that's my concern with respect to that. But it's also, it's also like, what do we do in this situation? Because clearly at this stage, it doesn't look like ACT's got the support to get the bill through past the select committee stage. You know, once the select committee's done and we see the thing with the select committee this time around is there's going to be overwhelming submissions on either side of the argument. You know, when it came to something like Three Waters, it was overwhelming on one side of the argument. The Labour government then disregarded a majority of it because they were all in support, and they're like, oh, well, most of these are kind of like, you know, pre-written, and they just all sent it in. It's like, well, people still went through the effort to submit the same thing. You don't have to read them all if you know they're the same, but you have to acknowledge the numbers. That's something that Labour didn't do. But on this occasion, we're going to have an overwhelming number of submissions on either side of the debate. Now, the thing is, one side of the debate's going to have no substance to anything they say, as they've failed to show any substance throughout. In fact, they've failed to show substance for the last 18 months, where this has kind of been in the purview. But it's, I just don't see it getting past the second reading at this point, based on what National at least is saying. I think if David Seymour plays his cards right, he can 100% convince New Zealand First to support it. Unfortunately, David Seymour convincing Winston Peters is not going to do much if National has absolutely no interest. Absolutely no interest. And so, you know, does that mean this goes nowhere? Probably. And it means that we're going to be entirely reliant on what it appears NZ First is going to get over the line, which is basically going through every piece of legislation we have that has reference to treaty principles and manually amending or repealing said clauses. Which is, you know, a great undertaking. But my issue with that is could Labour, if they so desired, just come into government next time they get elected and pretty much just reinsert that without any trouble? Because if they can, then what's the point? If they can, then what's the point? You know, if Winston Peters wanted to come out and say, hey, look, here's the deletion bill from 06 again, let's pass that through, or at least let's put that on the referendum agenda. Let's have the outcome of that referendum require either a referendum or a supermajority to overturn, whatever. Soul Power says it starts an exposure, starts a dialogue. That's true enough. This bill getting so much attention is indeed allowing us to have this dialogue, is allowing people to get more informed on this issue, which many people probably don't have that deep of an insight into. Unfortunately, it depends where they're getting their information from as to whether or not that's a good or bad thing. If the majority of people are getting their information purely from, like, Newshub, or not Newshub, 3 News, and 1 News, and so forth, then it's probably not all that good for us. Matthew Donahue says, I think that the treaty principles are like Pandora's box that was opened by activists, needs to be closed, and the bill is the only way to close it. Yeah, and here's the thing, right, and this is what I was going into with my big quote tweet that I read out just before, is on principle I oppose the existence of treaty principles because they just simply should not exist. However, the biggest issue with the treaty principles existing isn't that they that they exist per se, but more that they don't represent the spirit and the heart of what the treaty actually says. You see, what David Seymour and ACT have done with these principles is basically taken that Pandora's box that you speak of and essentially just closed it up and concisely rewritten what the treaty says without straying from its intent. Because right now what we've got is we've got a bunch of principles that have been messed around with, evolved dramatically without any public consultation. Purely dictated by academia and the judiciary, that of many of which have really no relation or no tie into the treaty at all, and have completely transformed our view of what the treaty means, and it actually tells us to believe the opposite of what the words of the treaty say. What David Seymour and ACT have proposed is say, hey, look, if we're going to have principles, let's have Parliament dictate what they are, with, of course, the blessing of the people. And let's ensure that whatever those principles are, that they don't contradict what the treaty says. His first principle is pretty much exactly what Article 1 says in the treaty, just using far more concise language. His second principle is again more or less the same, but rather than citing or writing out a concise version of the article itself, it just says we will protect what it states, or we will uphold what it states in Article 2. So Article 1 is essentially, the first principle is essentially Article 1 is Article 1. Let's acknowledge that. That is going to be how we govern going forward. Article 2 says what it does, and we are going to respect what Article 2 says. And Article 3, again, it's just being reaffirmed with this third principle. I hope you understand what I mean. The current principles are just a bunch of made-up ideological rubbish, literally redefining and reinterpreting our understanding of the treaty, and has been doing so for decades, to the point where there's a mainstream narrative about what the treaty means, including a bunch of random nonsense about partnership. That's been what it's been doing. This is why it's the biggest gaslighting situation that I think we've ever possibly seen since since the 2020 era. Because they come out here and say David Seymour is rewriting the treaty because he's trying to undo the actual rewriting of the treaty. The so-called experts tell us not to interpret what the treaty means based on the words in the treaty, but rather what they and their fellow colleagues have dictated to us since the 1980s. It's what they claim it means that matters, not what the words themselves mean. Like the 3 Ps. What is it? Protection, partnership, and participation, or something like that? I forget. Those like the 3 core principles, but then there's a bunch of other little offshoots. Bunch of things that they kind of make up and insert if and when they think it's appropriate to get the outcome they need in any particular tribunal hearing, for example. So, yeah, it's a problem. I'll quickly look at TikTok because they like to give me a lot of crap when I discuss this topic. The discusser says, the bill is shit though. Is it shit? Have you read it? Probably not. Tuma Mullen says, I haven't seen this streamer for a while. Hey, look, I was doing a lot of dreaming. What can I say? But that also brings me to this, because it's critically important that we acknowledge who it is that is opposing the Treaty Principles Bill the hardest. Who is behind the movement against the Treaty Principles Bill. And it is, at the end of the day, Te Pāti Māori, whether you want to admit it or not, whether you want to say, oh, Toitū Te Tiriti isn't Te Pāti Māori, apart from the fact, of course, that saying that the 2 people behind the party who are also Te Pāti Māori staffers, are somehow not Te Pāti Māori. Whatever, you can lie to yourself if you like. It is Te Pāti Māori. It's a Te Pāti Māori backed movement. It's a Te Pāti Māori established movement. It is all Te Pāti Māori, and quite frankly, it's a grift. But why it's important that we acknowledge it's Te Pāti Māori is because they oppose the Treaty Principles Bill for a variety of rather nonsensical reasons, a lot of them pertaining to the idea that they are the sovereign, whatever that means. No, you are not the sovereign, nor am I. So, it's one thing to believe that, the Treaty Principles Bill is probably infringing on areas of the treaty itself, which it doesn't, by the way. But it's another to cite reasons such as you being the sovereign, or you're entitled to complete, frankly, a complete separation from the Crown's government and systems. That is just something that's rather absurd. And so that's why I've brought this up. Because this is what Te Pāti Māori actually want to do. If they had the power, this is what they would want to do. Now, they know they'll never have that power, except if they get their own separatist nation, in which case they will probably be leveraging or negotiating the shit out of trying to get as much of this happening as possible. So what do they want? They want to establish a Māori parliament. That's, that is something that they've been wanting for years and years and years. And despite the fact that it was apparently agreed that they weren't going to go for a Māori parliament, they still want to have the effective outcome that would, or the same or similar outcome as they were desiring with a Māori parliament model. So it's not exactly clear what they're going to do now, but apparently the Māori parliament itself is off the table. I suspect it will just be something similar with a different name, and they're just lying to us, to be honest. Implement all Mātiki Mai recommendations for constitutional transformation. Now, that was, I believe, a report or something of that nature with a bunch of recommendations, which, quite frankly, you do not want implemented. I do forget what the core recommendations there were, but I did remember reading it at the time. I'm sure I can find that at some stage if it becomes relevant again. Remove the British royal family as head of state. So here's the thing, right? Honour the treaty. That's their whole movement. Honour the treaty, and yet they want to remove literally one party of the treaty. From the nation, full stop. Period. Without the head of state, British royal family as the head of state. I mean, who is literally signed between the head of state, the crown, the head of state of the British Empire, and Māori, and they want to just remove that. Okay. Recognise Aotearoa as the country's official name. I mean, I couldn't care less about that silly request. Return the foreshore and seabed to mana whenua. Return all central and local government land to mana whenua. Return all conservation land to mana whenua. It's just, give us all the bloody land back. Give us all the land. We don't care how you obtained it. Give us the land. Introduce a first right of refusal policy for mana whenua on all private land. Oh, how charming. End all land sales to foreign interests to be replaced by leasehold estates only. End perpetual leases. End the fiscal envelope. Insert relativity clauses into all Te Tiriti settlements retrospectively. Yeah, okay, retrospective is never something you really want to undertake. Make Waitangi Tribunal recommendations binding on the Crown and implement all unaddressed Waitangi Tribunal claim recommendations. Oh, not Waitangi Tribunal, but all unaddressed claim recommendations. Now, the issue with this, right, is it would effectively be that the Waitangi Tribunal has power and can dictate to the elected government officials. The elected government. So that just can't happen. That would be one that would literally breach the separation of powers. That would, it just can't happen. Okay, and do forgive me, I seem to have a blocked nose for some reason. I'm not sure why. Just give me a sec. So I was sick last week, so it's still kind of coming out of me. Abolish full and final large natural groupings, settlement policies, entrench the Māori electorates. Here's the thing, right? This is the weirdest thing about them, is they want to establish a Māori parliament, but they also want to entrench the Māori electorates. Which one is it? Which one do you want? Because one, they're both silly, and two, you can't have both. You can't have both. It's just how it is. Now, I'm trying to figure out whether I would rather them make their own Māori parliament or entrench Māori electorates. I'm not sure which one I'd prefer. What about you? Quickly looking back at the chat. Soul Power says, you can take the people out of the Stone Age, but it's slow taking the Stone Age out of the people, evolution into the modern world. Also over on TikTok. Taiwa says, we had a Māori parliament. Yes, I mean, there was a Māori parliament name, but it didn't have really any real power. I mean, I would argue it was no more significant than the mass huis you're having a lot this year, to be fair. I mean, it was a little bit more formal and specific than that, but effectively it didn't really do all that much. Let's go. Jack says, why are those who are left-leaning maintaining their ignorance over what Party Māori really are going for? Well, because it's not in their interest to accept reality, and in fact the left has been so ideologically captured that they can't even understand that there are a range of different ideological beliefs that have slowly been infiltrating its way into the left's consciousness. And it's now at the point where there are a bunch of postmodernist retards who, frankly, have no idea that they actually reject reality, or they believe that reality doesn't exist and that reality is inherently subjective. And that's why the left is so out of touch. And of course, Brown Genius, as he likes to do, calls me wrong, doesn't elaborate, and leaves. The discussion says, when one of the principles is making the government making laws, and only the government to make them, no thanks. Well, that's literally what the treaty did, so you can't really complain with that. Bear with me. I think I've been asked, are you pro-colonialism? Well, good question. The Western world would not exist without it. The Western world being the most advanced and superior human civilization to ever exist. So what do you reckon? He's saying it's changing the specifics. The discussor is saying it's changing the specifics of I have no idea what he's on about, to be honest. This is the issue with TikTok, is they get a little bit it can get a little bit vague. Oh, and welcome Phil. Welcome Phil. But yeah. So yeah, that's the Party Māori policy. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of their policy. Now, if we actually go to their website, we'll get a far better indication. Now, there are several policies here, but one of the ones that are that's the most significant is the Mana Motuhake policy. And this is one that I've actually gone over several times before, but it is extremely, extremely important to understand. And see, this is where this page comes from, by the way. But this is where this is extremely important. Because obviously we got up to entrench the Māori electorates, and then I stopped reading here. But what's important to understand is exactly what all of this entails. Now, when we look at what they want with the establishing of a Māori parliament, and despite what they've said, I don't think that's off the table. They're still going to want to do that in some capacity, in some format. So let's quickly read this just section here. Since 2020, Te Pāti Māori have demonstrated the power of tangata whenua to challenge and disrupt colonial systems of power and control and progress transformation of our constitutional norms through constant vigilance. The Westminster system continues to oppress and use colonising tools to constrain efforts to reclaim our land and our mana motuhake. It is only by restoring power and resource to tangata whenua, by establishing our own parallel systems of government and management systems, that we can achieve mana motuhake. Key there. Only by restoring power and resource to Māori, and by establishing our own parallel systems of government. Parallel health system, parallel justice system, parallel education system, parallel everything. We must continue to assert our tino rangatiratanga across all our domains, and at every opportunity work to build a united movement for liberation and emancipation. By working alongside tangata tiriti and tangata moana, we can decolonize and re-indigenize Aotearoa and realize the vision of an Aotearoa hou, taking our rightful place on the world stage as a Te Tiriti-based nation. Now, this is the thing. How are they going to go about? How are they going to go about getting these parallel systems of government? Now, most people would never be able to tell you. Most people, in fact, I reckon the majority of people who support Te Pāti Māori have no idea. have no idea. The reality is the following. We demand a Māori parliament. Our right to self-governance and self-determination is clear. Governance and management of programs and funding streams for Māori, by Māori, that is so poorly written, according to Māori kaupapa, such as the independent authorities outlined in Te Pāti Māori's policies, will be transferred to our Māori parliament, where our people can hold their own leaders accountable. There is even precedence for this kind of governmental devolution of powers. Just look at the Irish, the Scots, and the Welsh. Westminster did not work for the Scots or the Irish. Wellington definitely does not work for Māori. This is the key. Devolution of powers, such as was done for the Welsh, the Northern Irish, and the Scottish. Now, of course, many of you won't be ignorant as to the fact that they all are involved in the actual UK Parliament. The reason for that is because whilst they're given devolved powers, those devolved powers are simply for their regions. It's basically like saying this: hey, look, we understand that Auckland is kind of sick and tired of being so heavily dictated to by Wellington. So whilst you are still part of the country, whilst you're still going to be required to participate in these kind of core higher up laws and policies and systems, you're also going to have some powers devolved to you that are specific to the Auckland region, so that you can more effectively target the needs of your region. What Pāti Māori want to do is they want to take that, but rather than apply it based on where you live, they want to apply it to you based on who you are. And that is separatism, racial separatism. That is as close to apartheid as one could possibly get, without it strictly speaking being South African apartheid. Now, people like to say, well, unless you're technically oppressing the other peoples, it's not apartheid. It's like, I'm sorry. Apartheid is literally derived from I think a French term meaning to separate or apart. So, I'm not interested in that. What I want to acknowledge is that apartheid in South Africa was horrific because it treated groups of people completely differently based on their ancestry, based on their ethnicity, based on their race, and respect to blacks in South Africa. That meant they were literally oppressed and segregated and treated as lesser than. But here, it would be very different. It would be, well, actually, it would be not so different while still being completely different. It would be, well, you're not technically being oppressed, but also we're not the same. We're not technically oppressing anyone, but you still don't have the right to go here, and here. We get all of our own shit over here. You get all of your own stuff over there. The only real difference, the only actual real difference is the level of impact it has on the other side. Pākehā won't, technically speaking, be oppressed per se. That's about the only difference. And technically there will be both sides of the, both parties will have a form of governance and control in some respect. Now, of course, if we interpret Pāti Māori's policy more broadly, I mean, they're going to want to try and take as much control of as much land and as much resources as possible. So, I mean, that does leave things up for debate. But the issue is this: it's the fact that you can walk down the street and have completely different sets of rights, duties, and systems as someone right next to you, someone in the barbershop. The fact that someone could commit a crime against a non-Māori or a European New Zealander, a Kiwi, and then not even be dealt with by the European system, because that would be against this whole thing. Quickly back to the chat. Phil says, sorry you missed the start. That's no dramas whatsoever. They wish to undermine the treaty altogether. That's exactly what the Party Māori want to do. They want to undermine the treaty. Got no interest in the treaty. In fact, the majority of their policy is completely inconsistent with the treaty, and yet they have the gall to march down the street and demand we honour it. Whilst we actually are. Soul Power says, let Māori enterprise finance their own government, stop using the collective money. I mean, elements of fairness to that argument, I would say. Mana motuhake sounds like treason. Potentially. Maybe the ability or the process of obtaining mana motuhake very much is. Phil 5-1 says, the Welsh, the Northern Irish, and the Scottish are all constitutional monarchist systems under one rule. Exactly. They just have some devolution of powers, which they have in their national assemblies. Yeah. But at the end of the day, they're still part of the UK. They're still part of the UK Parliament. And so forth. They're still required to follow the, a good chunk of the laws. There's just some differences in control over more regional issues. Soul Power says, we will be impressed by tolls and levies, oppressed through tolls and levies through each so-called tribe. Hey, look, that is a very real threat as well. Tell you what, TikTok's popping off. A lot of discussion in there. Tabunt says, would Māori governance really be that bad though? I see no negatives in it. This is the issue. It's not a matter of Māori governance. It's a matter of having two separate systems of governance based entirely on who your ancestors are. And that you would be sharing, you'd be walking down the street and having completely different rights and duties, completely different systems to utilize than the people next to you. I mean, let's say you right now are a Pākehā bloke, a white bloke who's married to a Māori woman, and then all of a sudden, you have completely different systems and laws to follow. How the hell would that work? So, the idea that there's no negatives in it is nonsensical, and I don't even think you understand quite what's being discussed. And Tawa makes a point of we could do that with iwi whom are regionally based. I think, with respect to the devolution of powers, the likes that the Welsh and all that have, you could, in theory, devolve powers to like a local government level for iwi. Okay? For at least iwi lands in particular regions. You could do that. I mean, you'd be moving closer and closer to, the Native American reservation, sure, but if that is what they really want, who are we to stand in the way? Separatism, Tawa also says separatism is negatively based. This is by choice. That is completely wrong. Separatism is separatism regardless of how and why it's implemented. That's just how it is. It is separatism regardless of how and why it is implemented. Separatism has got negative connotations with it because it's an inherently negative thing to do. Frankly, it's not something that we should do as humans because we are all human. Look, there is a difference, a very big difference between immigration control, people who are not from the country whatsoever, just coming in willy-nilly, and people within a country being divided based on who they are, based on their ancestry. That's repugnant. Most people would agree. 90 years ago, this would have been absolutely repulsive. Let's Go Jack says, Labour in almost 7 years have caused so much damage, it'll take 10 years to recover. It'll take 15, 20 years to recover, frankly. Especially because we're bound to have a lot of issues. The problem is, it's going to take 12 years from now, we're probably going to be in a reasonably okay place, and then Labour's just going to get re-elected because that's how people think. They're like, we need change. Here's a change. The socialists. Good idea. Sweden disagrees. Te Bunt says that Maori were undisturbed for thousands of years. Thousands. Undisturbed for thousands of years. How long were you on those boats? Here's the thing about indigeneity. Now, if we're going to base indigeneity off the modern interpretation of what indigeneity is, which is a culture that is naturally that naturally developed in a particular region that was uninhabited prior to that, then it is impossible that Maori are any older than like 700, 800 years old, right? In terms of the culture itself. So the Maori culture being indigenous can only exist if we have like a 700 and 800 year kind of time frame of its existence. If we want to argue that Maori culture, Maori themselves have existed before that, then you have to throw the indigeneity argument out of the window. Okay, and this is what people this is why I'm happy to use the modern interpretation of what indigeneity is, but this is, if we're going to do that, this is what we need to understand. Maori coming on boats isn't an issue, because we can just acknowledge that the people who came here, settled and established Maoridom as we know it, came here, and that's when the culture, the norms, and all of the very many things, particularly pertaining to Maori mythology, were really at their, really started developing. Right, you hear about the various many different Maori gods and so forth. They are directly related to the land here, not anywhere else. You get reference to Hawaii or whatever, but that's about it. So the culture itself is naturally occurring here, nowhere else. It didn't originate in Samoa. It didn't originate in Taiwan. The culture itself is naturally occurring here, and as such, the argument and the modern understanding of it is that Maori are indigenous. That's completely fine. I'm happy to take that. I'm happy to accept that. However, we can't then turn around and claim that Maori were undisturbed for thousands of years, or for 1,000 years, because that's simply not true. They were only here from around 1200 at the very earliest. More likely the 1300s. So, thousands of years is nonsense, which I've heard cited before, and 1,000 years itself is also nonsense. Right. Big Shaunsy says the Crown has placed themselves higher than Maori for centuries. For centuries. Is that right? That's an interesting one. So centuries implies more than 2. The treaty was signed less than 2 ago. So, how's that work? Have fun. Quickly. Soul Power also mentions, going back to the whole separatism thing, does that mean a separate identification and passport for each government? That's a fast way to drain the economy and international business. Look, I have no idea. Maybe. Actually, if you remember a few months ago, I posted a Māori passport design. I thought that was quite good. People quite liked it. I actually thought it was kind of cool. Don't Want To says, how convenient. Change the definition of the word to fit the situation. Hey, look. To be fair, the only people, if we use the most literal definition possible of indigenous, which means just naturally occurring from there, no immigration whatsoever, didn't travel there, then you would the only people the only people who are indigenous would be the people who live on the land where the first humans existed. That would be it. That'd be the only way. So, to be fair, I kind of don't mind this interpretation. Though, I don't necessarily agree personally with the idea that indigeneity should be, can only apply, or should only apply, when it's the first people there. When it was uninhabited and then became naturally occurring. Because New Zealand culture, we are distinct from anything else. We don't naturally occur. This culture that we have does not naturally occur anywhere else. It's a great blend of Māori culture and the European culture that we brought together, and it's naturally, unique to here. So, whilst based on the interpretation that I've already outlined, New Zealanders, just generally speaking, not Māori, are not Indigenous. Where the hell are New Zealanders Indigenous to then? Sure, we can say our ancestors were from this place, but then again, given how complex in particular Europe is, where the hell, genuinely, where the hell are we Indigenous to? Because that is a complex mess that's changed hands a trillion times over the last few thousand years. And, frankly, I think if a culture is naturally occurring, is unique to a place, I think we need to have some form of designation for that. Because pretending like Māori culture is this culture to place on a pedestal because it naturally is from here, it doesn't originate anywhere else, when New Zealand culture is exactly the same, apart from the fact that it originated a few hundred years later. It's like, I don't agree with that. So, quickly, bear with me. The United Nations Declaration of Rights to Indigenous Peoples is the cause of this nonsense, in my opinion. I disagree. I think UNDRIP is an inherently flawed document that we never should have signed up to. And frankly, there's a lot of stuff there which just tries to redefine and reinterpret how relationships between, former colonies of like the British Empire and, nations that were created through the process of colonization, interact with indigenous populations. I just don't think it actually does us any good, to be completely honest with you. But yeah, quickly looking back at TikTok. Tyler says, are we going to forget when Te Pāti Māori said they have superior DNA? Yes, they've got superior sporting genetics. They're physically stronger. All that sort of stuff. Good for them. Good for them. It's funny how long it took them to get rid of that. And only took being called out from them to realize that maybe that wasn't a good idea. But we all know how they think. That's the thing. They told us how they think. Eldon Solomon says, you don't have a PhD or a doctorate. Yeah, good one, mate. A PhD or a doctorate. But managed to come up with all of these so-called facts. You don't need a PhD to read. Fun fact. I wonder what the king thinks. Well, the king is a woke PR guy. That's what our monarchy is now. The only thing they care about is PR, and they do a terrible job at it. So he's woke and he cares about PR. So he will say whatever he thinks is politically correct. What did the king think about Lydia Thorpe? I couldn't tell you what he exactly thought about Lydia Thorpe, but what a bloody joke that woman is. Absolutely embarrassed Australia. Absolutely embarrassed them. How come the British still haven't colonized China or Russia? I think you know the answer to that one, don't you? But yeah. We don't really need to go into the Te Pāti Māori policy more than we have. But we can cover the Hikoi quickly. And specifically, what actually happened at the Hikoi, because we know in the build-up to them reaching Wellington, this bloke here was arrested. Now, what exactly happened between the time that the video of him kind of having his flag stripped from him by a thug, and the police arresting him. I'm not entirely sure. If people know, I'd love to hear it. But what we do know is that the guy's he's been grazed up and he was arrested. And from what we know, all he did was effectively counter-protest with a New Zealand flag and was assaulted for waving that New Zealand flag. And he was so apparently arrested for inciting violence. Based on the information I've seen, that's all I know. That's all I know. So, what are your thoughts on this? Is a closer look at what actually happened to the bloke. I mean, that's not acceptable. Frankly, that's not acceptable at all. Like, clearly from this photo, he's not happy about being arrested, is he? Not happy at all. However, the fact that he's being arrested in the first place is extremely questionable, so I could understand that kind of reaction. I mean, for goodness sake, he was waving a flag and was assaulted, and all of a sudden, the police having, 4 of them place hands on him. I don't think so. The police arrested him for being aggressive, Dwift1 says. Yeah, but where's the evidence of aggression outside of the time where he's already had the police's hands on him? Right? Like, why wasn't the guy that literally assaulted him arrested? Can you answer that question? No, you can't, because you don't actually know. You're just following the narrative that you were told. That is the issue. When you're following the narrative you were told, you aren't actually contributing any value to the conversation. But it's whatever. However, I did want to bring this up. And yeah, quickly. UJ Tan says no scars or no scrapes in the pic with the cops. Police obviously responsible for that. Yep, 100%. The police are clearly responsible for him being hurt. And well, I think Phil knows all too well about that. And yeah, as Phil was just chimed in, the police lie and are far too often aggressive. So, yeah. And so this was, Joel Terry shared this, commented this below my post. And he's like, would be welcome to hear more takes. The stuff coming from overseas isn't very informed on our history, but quick to jump to conclusions about what's going on in our country. So we'll give this a quick watch.
Woken up because I was shouting at the TV saying, why can't we hear from somebody who actually supports this bill? In other words, let's have 2 sides of the story.
That was after they were up to their 3rd story on it, eh? The opening 3 feature stories. Yeah, I saw that.
It's as if nothing else has happened in the world. In terms of the Te Pāti Māori performance last week, it goes to show, that political party cannot invoke any sort of argument whatsoever on any subject. All they do is offer theatre, slogans, headlines, sound bites for the TV, but never actually tell us what their problem is with this bill. Why not make a speech in Parliament? And I see that, I call her Hannah Haka now, the young woman who led the Haka, was complaining about the fact that she never got to speak in the House against the bill. And the issue was, as I understand it, there was a spot reserved for Te Pāti Māori, but Rawiri Waititi and Debbie Ngarewa Paka would not give it to her. So, I mean, every time you have a parliamentary debate, there are only a certain number of speeches. I think it's 12, isn't there, in the first reading? So they have to be spread around the parties proportionately, and it decided that somebody else for Te Pāti Māori would speak. Or if she did get up to say something, she obviously didn't take advantage of it because she ripped up the bill and then went into her theatre. I would love to hear what the Maori Party's problem is with this bill as espoused by David Seymour. It seems to me there's not too much wrong with it, really. I mean, the government has the right to govern. Maori shall retain all the rights they had at the time of the signing of the treaty in 1840, and everybody is equal before the law. I mean, what is there not to like about that? I see that various legal academics and politicians saying, oh, it's just way too simplistic. Well, you know what? The best things in life are simple, easy to understand concepts. That's how people can get on board. And I think that if we actually put this thing to a referendum, the result we all know would be a runaway victory for support of the Treaty Principles Bill. So the Maori Party, pure theatre, they actually have no concept of how to debate, and they don't appear to have any real ideas apart from abuse of anybody with a white skin.
Okay.
Patty B's just chimed in. Responding to Peter Williams there. Thank you very much, Peter Williams, for actually saying something of value. Batty B says, that's where you're wrong, old man. Māori rights are not the same. That is exactly why the Treaty Principles Bill is being proposed. Because we have people such as Batty B, such as Rawiri Waititi, such as Debbie Ngawera Packer and John Tamihere, such as the academics, the Waitangi Tribunal, who are actually convincing themselves that Māori do not have the same rights, that they are entitled to different rights. And that gradually over the last few decades in particular, we have had things implemented which are race-based rather than universal, or at the very least, not based on race. Right? So Big Sean's, he's trying to say that there's this belief in New Zealand that people aren't all equal, and that's why Seymour is pushing the bill. And the evidence of that is that Seymour's pushing the bill, but somehow that doesn't quite add up to him because it's seemingly his belief that we are all equal under the law, that there is no unequal treatment. Because he says, I'm scratching my head trying to figure out why or figure out how all New Zealand are unequal. But this is exactly it. As soon as you start writing into legislation things which treat people differently based on their ethnicity, even if it's something very small, something that may not even necessarily impact someone, it is still unequal. Right? It's still unequal. When you say that Māori, for example, should have 50% of the decision making on water management boards with veto powers, that's not equal. When you say that Māori should have Māori electorates, mandated Māori electorates based entirely on the number of people on the Māori electoral roll, that only Māori are allowed to vote for, meaning that Māori have mandated representation in Parliament that no other ethnicity has, that is a difference. That is unequal law, unequal treatment. The treaty principles are something that have been used to reinforce the arguments behind implementing more and more and more of such implementations of laws that are unequal. That is why the Treaty Principles Bill is a thing, and that is why New Zealand First has for many decades now opposed the principles. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully that helps. But Peter Williams is exactly right with respect to Te Pāti Māori. They don't have any substance, they just jump around. Jump around and make a scene, and hopefully that's enough. They've got absolutely no substance to any of their beliefs. Nothing, no actual argument that's going to get the majority of people behind them. VXZZZ says, the bill doesn't promote equality, it promotes the opposite. I'd love to read where in the bill it does the opposite, because it reads the exact opposite of your comment. It's impossible to read the Treaty Principles Bill and come to the conclusion that it does not reinforce equality. Tabunt says, Te Pāti Māori do not reflect the wishes and desire of the majority of Māori. That is 100% true. 100% true. Dwift one says, you're coming at it as if Pākehā came to New Zealand at the same time as Māori, though. That's an interesting take, given absolutely nothing I said supports that comment. So VXZZ just is changed from the bill makes it unequal to it's not the bill but rather the consequences that'll make it unequal. Well, again, you have to substantiate that thing. You can't just make up claims and expect us to accept them just so that it affirms your belief. At the end of the day, there is no substance to your claim, and that's just how it is. It's this simple. It cannot be altered whether anyone likes it or not. What cannot be altered? I'm presuming you're referencing the treaty itself cannot be altered, and the treaty itself is not being altered, so that's not an issue. But apparently, according to Trill Evolve, Te Pāti Māori represent the wants of Māori and people of Māori descent that love their ancestors. So essentially, if you do not think that Te Pāti Māori represents you as a Māori, then you don't love your ancestors. Tragic. I'm sorry, Apanui Ringamotu, I have failed you. I have failed you. Rain God says, this bill invades, interesting, and invalidates the importance of Indigenous protection of rights. Whatever that means. Also not true, but... quickly back to the main chat, people. Phil says Peter is very astute. That he is. The treaty principles are modern ideas based or entrenched in Western political ideologies. Exactly, and that's the biggest issue, for example, with the likes of the United Nations Declaration of Rights to Indigenous People, is it's just a bunch of frankly, political ideologies dictating how how nations should interact and facilitate so-called indigenous needs around the world. And of course, something that, if you guys don't use TikTok, you won't know this, but many people on TikTok are rather not all there, so to speak. And so you'll be discussing whatever it happens to be that you're discussing, and all of a sudden they'll just start making accusations that are unrelated, unsubstantiated, don't make all that much sense. But you feel inclined to respond to them because you just can't quite get your head around why someone can be that stupid, how someone can be that stupid. So Dwift One, of course, says, history says Māori were here first. It's undisputed. Why are you disregarding that? Now, you'll find absolutely no one in all of this has disputed that. No one. Not me, not anyone in the chat that she can see. No one has disputed that. So, how tragic is that? Have you looked into Riana Te Ngahu? She is a lawyer who also explains the confusion between the treaties. I haven't, not her specifically, though I can probably say word for word before even listen to what she has to say, what she claims the confusion is. Just a hunch, because it's the same old lies every single time. Phil acknowledges neo-Marxist ideologies even. This is the issue with the left, and I was alluding to it earlier when I mentioned that the left has become infested by postmodernist ideology without even realizing it. I mean, they don't really have any regard for reality. Reality doesn't really exist to them. It's a rather complex, almost undefinable ideology, to be fair. Just because it basically predicated on the fact that reality is inherently subjective, and that, or at least our understanding of reality as we know it, is very much likely influenced and dictated to us by the interests of, let's say, the patriarchy, or the interests of a minority, of an oppressive force, and so forth. And so everything that we know is probably not actually accurate whatsoever. It's a complete mess. I'm not the most well versed on it, but it's 100% infested the shit out of left wing echo chambers, and so now they all say that my truth this, my truth that, or what the Pākehā say about the treaty is incorrect because it's coming from a Pākehā perspective. It's actually the Māori perspective that matters. So essentially, objective reality does not exist if it disagrees with what I say. Charming. Mitchy U says, what's your thoughts on the Dragon Mafia? I wouldn't have a clue what the Dragon Mafia are, to be honest. Do-do-do-do. Walking on the Spirit says, the bill has no basis. Legal representatives have advised Parliament not to follow through with this. Legal representatives, otherwise known as left-wing ideologues within academia who fundamentally oppose equality. Give us a second. Edward says, my feelings sore, I need free stuff. Walking in the Spirit asks, define equality. For me, equality is treating people the same regardless of any insignificant characteristics. So, with respect to laws, that would mean the laws apply to all people the same. If you're Māori, you are just as entitled to government support for this as a nation. That's an example of equality, right? So, equality speaks for itself. Okay, you shouldn't have to define it. Okay, it's a very broad term. It broadly applies in a range of different areas in life. So, for example, I think a 18-year-old Māori boy is just as entitled to walking to the pub as the 18-year-old white boy. Thank you very much. But I think the line of questioning here was, has that ever happened politically and in reality? Yes, it has. And in fact, for the most part, that has been the... To be fair, actually, no, it hasn't. Only because the Māori electorate seats have existed since the 1800s, as far as I'm aware. So no, based on that, they haven't. But generally speaking, in the vast majority of areas, we have exactly that, equality. Unfortunately, where you might be mistaken or where you may be confused is you're under the illusion that the inequality is in favour of non-Māori. But it's actually the other way around, and it has been for at least 70 years. Of course, there are always instances where, we can look at Pukekohe, where there were people who were saying no Māori allowed or whatever and for certain things, but these were isolated events which were very community-based and not entrenched in our law, or at least codified in our law at all. Trill Evolve says, what land and resources have Pākehā lost to Māori since the treaty? Good question. Not sure how it's relevant, though, to be honest with you. Land exchanges hands for a variety of different reasons. Some of them will be treaty settlement related. Others will be sale related. Really doesn't matter. As long as it's just, I couldn't care less. Politically, there is never equality, just my point of view. I mean, I respect your point of view, although there's no substance to that claim. I think it would fundamentally... To reach that conclusion, fundamentally, you would have to have a completely different understanding of what equality is. So, for example, equality of outcome is really just equity, and equity is a pipe dream that cannot exist. Do Māori have a better chance of being hired into the workforce? It's pretty hit and miss. Depends depends what the person doing the hiring is looking for. Frankly, that when it comes down to it, that is what is most relevant. What is it that the person who is hiring is looking for? And there are certain instances where there very much is an emphasis on hiring people for diversity's sake and placing emphasis on Māori recruitment and so forth. So, yeah, in some cases, Māori do have a better chance of being hired into the workforce. But it's a real case-by-case basis. What version of the treaty do you support? All of them, because they say the same thing. They say the same thing. Fun fact. Oh, quickly look back at the chat. X is popping off right now too. Karma Train in particular. Crikey. Yeah, right. Yeah, Phil says the left has tried to conflate equity and equality for about 3 decades. Exactly. The problem with it is it turns people off the idea of equality, whilst also kind of not really informing people of what equity actually is. Because as we know, equity just cannot happen. You cannot have equity of outcome at all. You cannot cater to all of the individual needs of every single individual perfectly. It's just impossible. It requires inherently unequal and unfair policy to implement. So, yeah, and so that's the biggest, like, almost catch-22 with equity, is to achieve equity you need inequality, but you want equity in order to achieve equality. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. To achieve equity, you need inequality, and you only want equity to achieve equality. It ain't happening. I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, I'm not. I'll just leave Matthew to deal with the karma train. Joel, hey Joel, how you going? Hope you don't get too much shade during the stream. Shade? I never get shade. Every contribution to my streams, be them rain or shine, is never shade. Phil says, equality is a state of being. As a political principle, it's base rights, freedoms, and obligations. 100%. Equity is impossible. Just leave it at that. 100%. You don't need to elaborate further. Equity is impossible. Walking in the Spirit says, I appreciate your view and have enjoyed this live. Well done. Enjoy your evening. Well, thank you very much for being contributing and being respectful. Mark.co.nz says, do you consider Māori as the native people of New Zealand? Well, I don't consider them native to anywhere else, so that should answer your question. And so this is so to Bunt earlier, he asked me, what version of the treaty do you support? I said I support both of them because they say the same thing. And his response is, that's why I'm recommending that lawyer to you. And the thing is, I know what that lawyer is going to say before I would ever go and listen to that lawyer, because it is the same tried and quite frankly, failed argument as to the differences between the two texts. The only difference between the two texts is they're in different languages, and one's more concise than the other. That's literally it. So yeah, so we've already looked at this guy. You know, that was obviously the police that did it. Also, great news for Brian Tamaki getting his charges dropped, his case dropped, because that was actually ridiculous. But also there was a couple weeks ago, David Seymour and Jenny May Clarkson sat down. First Jenny May Clarkson and Party Māori, and I think this is just more or less about the Treaty Principles Bill. So we'll just get into that. Have a quick break.
Well, ACT leader David Seymour is behind the bill. He joins us in studio now. Morena. Before we even get to that, can we talk about the timing of the bill? Why was it changed?
Well, can we, before we even get to that, can we start with your introduction? Because it is not a divisive bill. It is some people's opinion that it's a divisive bill. Your job is to reflect the views of all New Zealanders, not to take sides. Second of all, as a matter of fact, it does not change the Treaty of Waitangi at all. It changes the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, which was set down by Parliament in 1975. Now, if we can just start with a bit of fairness and a few facts, then I'm very happy to look at your other questions.
So there have been protests.
Quickly, VXZZZ. I am not a Brian Tamaki fan. I just don't like injustice. Okay, let's get that straight.
You know, across the country, there's a hikoi that's coming down to Wellington. Is that not a sign that there is division in what this bill is doing?
No, it's a sign that some people oppose it. Yesterday, there were counted 17 people outside Parliament, and I watched your news last night, which was zoomed in on one or two people to make it look as though it was bigger than it really was. And I think one of the things that people are a little tired of.
VX also says it doesn't change the treaty. Then he continues to say it changes the principles. That's because the principles are not the treaty, and that's what you need to understand. The principles did not exist for 140 years after the treaty was actually signed. Okay, what happened was in 1975 with the Treaty of Waitangi Act, there was a section in that act which referenced principles which had no existence whatsoever. They'd never existed. So for whatever reason, the Labour government then implemented that policy, implemented that piece of legislation, put that in there, and then in the 1980s, when there was a court case, the judge that had to come to a conclusion had to reference that section and invent principles on the spot. They weren't in the treaty. They shouldn't exist in the first place. But what Seymour is doing is simply putting the power of what those principles say back into the hands of not only Parliament, but in the hands of the people, rather than unelected people in academia and the judiciary.
Is rather than asking, well, David, what's this about, putting all of this slant that actually makes it harder to have the discussion that New Zealanders deserve. Now, to get to your question, why was it changed? I've been asked that by media all week. I've answered it many times, but I'll do it again if you'd like me to.
Oh, I'd like you to, because you're here on Breakfast and our audience may not have heard it.
And the answer is very simply that it was never changed. Dates go up and down all the time. If you're getting something ready to go to Parliament, sometimes the work goes faster than you think, sometimes goes slower than you think. It happens in most workplaces in different ways up and down New Zealand. What was different this time is that the Waitangi Tribunal have demanded a blow-by-blow account of the development of the bill. They said, when will it be introduced? We said, well, here's a date it could happen. Turned out it was earlier. But to make that some sort of major difference and a change, I think is totally inaccurate. Now, what would be helpful is if we could talk about what's actually in the bill. What the bill says is that the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, which Parliament said existed in 1975 but have never defined, those principles are that we have a government that has a right to govern and a Parliament that has a right to make laws, that the rights of hapu and iwi Māori when they sign the treaty will be protected, but that those rights, apart from treaty settlements, should be enjoyed by all New Zealanders because we're all born in this country and it's the only country that most of us have, and that finally we all have the same rights and duties before the rule of law, just as the Treaty of Waitangi in the Māori version in its third article says, Ngā tikanga katoa rite tahi.
So, you talk about those settlements. Those settlements are about addressing historic grievances. The treaty is about an ongoing relationship with the Crown and with Māori as well. Does your bill propose to remove the formal concept of partnership?
Well, the formal partnership...
Beyond the settlements.
The formal concept of partnership is not in the treaty. It's a creation of the Waitangi Tribunal and the court. The court said in 1987 that the treaty formed a, quote, partnership between races. I believe that that is the wrong way for any country to proceed, because what it tells you is that your role in the society depends on your ancestry. And people who think that the treaty is a partnership need to explain, how is this world that you want supposed to work? Where in society, where in the world, in fact, has it been a success to treat people differently based on their ancestry? It's a terrible idea. It's failed.
Quickly before we continue here, Phil asks an important question. Eric, do you think that Seymour's greatest error was in naming the bill the Treaty Principles Bill? The thing about that is I'm not sure what else he could have called it. To be completely honest. I genuinely don't know what else he could have called it. So no, I don't think it was an error at all. Error at all. I think the substance of the bill itself was going to cause this issue regardless of what it was called. And fundamentally, that's exactly what he's doing. It's a bill related to the treaty principles and about defining them and codifying them into legislation, and having that being done by Parliament with the go-ahead of the people, which is infinitely superior to what we currently have. Infinitely superior. Look, at the end of the day, if Te Pāti Māori, Labour, the Greens, even National, if they are so convinced that this is a divisive bill that we should not support, then allow the people to prove that it's a divisive bill that we should not support. But they know it's not a divisive bill, and people do broadly support it. So that's why they don't want it to go through. I don't want to stray too far from the topic, but Van der Kez says we should be voting a capital gains tax, and having the super rich actually paying their fair share. You probably don't want to know how much tax the super rich pay. Then would be my guess. Additionally, we have a de facto capital gains tax through the Bright Line test. So yeah, there's that. So basically, if you buy a house and then you sell it within 2 years, you get taxed on it. It was 10 years for a while. If it was within that 10 years, but yeah, that's not going to happen. But yeah, that's the case. Riley says no, there should be one tax bracket and no secondary tax. All right, we'll get back to this.
All over the place, and all of the good movements in history have said, no, actually, each of us deserve equal respect and dignity for being human, not to be divided by our background.
But is there a difference between equal and fair treatment? You talk about equality for everybody, but what about fairness and equality?
Well, would you like to explain how you think that they're different?
Well, just in terms of, you've got the treaty, and there were grievances. That we know that there have been grievances since that treaty was signed back in 1840. So when you look at the treaty principles that you are introducing, are they fair to that treaty, which was signed by both parties back in 1840? You talk about equality, but what about the fairness in all of this?
Well, let's just talk about two issues that you've raised. First of all, the treaty settlement. The ACT parties voted for every single treaty settlement in 30 years. I support the treaty settlement process. I think it's a wonderful thing. In fact, I don't think many countries could have looked at the difficulties and the challenges that we've had as a country. Terrible things happened through the 1860s and beyond, no question. And we've gone back and we've methodically tried to understand what happened and put redress in place, not for all Māori, but for the specific hapu and iwi who were affected in each time and place. I'm very proud of that. I think it's a great achievement for New Zealand. That's why this bill protects treaty settlements. However, it also is important to recognise that what's fair is that if you are a child born into this country or a person who legally immigrates here, you should have exactly the same rights and duties, because you know what? There's lots of unfairness in history. People that have faced huge challenges, people that have come here as refugees very recently, people who survived the Holocaust, people who came here to escape grinding poverty in Ireland or Scotland or England like some of my ancestors did. We can all point to wonderful things and terrible things in history, but the question is what's fair is that each of us have the same basic rights before the law to overcome the challenges we face today, not based on what happened 200 years ago, but based on what we can do to make a difference in our own lives and flourish. That's the only way that you make the world a better place.
We had Te Pāti Māori co-leader, Debbie Ngarewa-Paika, on the program. She says that this bill isn't about equity or equal rights. Take a listen.
Tangata whenua are the last bastion. We are who you need to talk to and to make sure the correction of our moana, our whenua, our whānau is protected and looked after. You remove tangata whenua rights, then you have allowed full access to exploitation of all of that. Exploitation of our whenua, exploitation of our whānau, exploitation of our moana. And by doing this is exactly where ACT are going. This isn't about giving equality to anyone but those who are wanting to exploit the resources and the rights of us in Aotearoa.
What's your response to that?
Well, it's a really interesting clip for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, she's making the claim that tangata whenua or Māori somehow are the only people who care, or at least care more than other people, about the natural environment and resources. That's not true. New Zealanders from all walks of life care deeply about our natural environment and about conserving what makes New Zealand such a great place, which is our connection to the land. But it is also true that not every Māori person is an environmentalist. I'm sure there's some Māori people who don't care much about the environment whatsoever, as there are some non-Māori people and there are some people who are not Māori but do care about the environment. And this is my point. What they are saying is that we are somehow bound by our ancestry to play a role in the society that we live in. What I'm saying is that each of us are a human being with the same basic rights and dignity. We all come in different shapes and sizes and attitudes and backgrounds, but we should not try and assume that all people fit into a group based on their race or their ancestry. That used to be called racism, discrimination, stereotyping, the things that I would have thought we'd all be against. Today, it's paraded as a legitimate view. I don't think it is it's legitimate to express it, but I don't think it's a legitimate view. Equality and universal human rights, that's what we're about, and that's what this bill is about.
National says it won't support this bill. The Prime Minister says it won't progress past next week. How does that align with your goal of reducing public spending? Because how much has this process cost so far?
Well, what it costs is that Parliament's going to be open anyway, so I guess in theory you could debate some other bill. That's the cost, is that you can't debate another bill while you're debating this one, although actually at any given time there's probably about 20 bills going through Parliament, so I guess this will be one of the 20. That's really the cost. If you want to try and add that up, you can. But
I'm asking you what the cost is.
So, well, I'm just saying that's, you can't really put any kind of figure on it. It's just some of Parliament's time will be used for this bill instead of another one, but Parliament's probably
this is a bill that National says it won't support. There's no other party that's going to support it, and that it won't get past next week's first reading.
No, it will get past next week's first reading, and then it will go to, and this again, let's get some facts and some fairness here, some balance in the media. There's going to be a select committee inquiry for 6 months, and what that means is that New Zealanders are going to be able to submit, and for many people, this will be the first time that they've been able to have a say about our country's constitutional future, not told they're the wrong type of person, they're not an expert, they're racist, they can't have a say or whatever, you're not tangata whenua, you're just tangata tiriti, you're not allowed to have a say on this. It's going to democratise the treaty. And what's interesting is the people who like to say that this bill is going nowhere actually want to stop it before it goes anywhere, because they know that as soon as everyone has a say about our constitutional future on equal grounds, that is a revolution for the way we talk about the treaty. It's actually going to enhance the manner of the treaty, frankly.
The Prime Minister says it's not going to support it.
Well, no, I've heard him say that. Let's see where it gets to in 6 months' time.
Will you meet the hikoi when it arrives at Parliament on the 19th?
I think highly likely, yes.
Yep. David Seymour, leader of the ACT Party, joining us this morning. Tēnā koe.
Alrighty. It's a better page. How are we going? So we have 233 viewers over on X, YouTube, Twitch, etc. And then TikTok is not bad as well. Not bad. 237 total. We take that. Thank you all who are tuned in right now. So, if you are wondering what we've been going over today, we're basically going, is the Treaty Principles Bill dead in the water? Is it dead in the water? Because, as I think Jenny May Clarkson just kindly pointed out to him, Luxon isn't supporting it, National isn't. New Zealand First isn't technically supporting it either, though I think there is certainly room for Seymour to get Peters on board. So is it dead in the water? And I think, whilst I think it is, it's going to go a long way to resolve this issue and advance this conversation further. Because it needs to happen. Now, I want to reiterate what was being discussed, what we went into kind of right near the start is New Zealand First has a kind of almost a de facto treaty deletion of the Treaty Principles Bill going through, or that does look like it's getting support through the coalition agreement, that effectively is going to go into each bit of legislation, remove reference to the treaty principles. which I 100% support. The only issue with that is whether or not that can be easily overturned when a Labour government comes in. So, yeah. But interestingly, I'm just looking through the TikTok chat right now, and it's I find it quite interesting some of the things people come up with in terms of responses. I want to give a quick just to quickly thank Riley again for roses. I said that over the top of the video before. Very much appreciated. Usually when I'm streaming on TikTok, it gets taken down for reproduced content or something, even though it's usually just me talking. But whatever. And back on the equity versus equality thing, as people keep saying, equality isn't enough. What we need is equity. The issue is equity is unachievable. In order to achieve equity, you need an equality, and the only reason you actually strive for equity is to achieve equality. It's a catch-22. You can't do it. Build your own equity. Whatever that means, people. Build your own equity. Marius is saying that this all seems like a very interesting distraction. Look, I mean, you can make an argument that this is all a big distraction. I think some people have posed the question that it's a distraction for what New Zealand First, for example, are doing with going through the pieces of legislation and want to remove it. I don't think that's true at all, but hey, there's an argument there. Certainly an argument there. We need to reverse the 1975 bill and remove the Māori role. We most certainly need to amend the Treaty of Waitangi Act 1975 to remove reference to the Treaty Principles Bill, and we also need to remove the Māori role, yes. The Māori role is completely unnecessary. We do not need it. In fact, it's being used right now by Te Pāti Māori as a tool of gaining significant power over our parliament, significant representation in our parliament based purely on the fact that they can game the system due to it being ethnic based. So, yes. But I mean, that's pretty much all I had going for us today, people. For those wondering why I haven't done one of these in a few weeks now, well, we had the US election. Oh, that was a nice 8-hour stream. We had the US election, and since then, I've been sick. I've been getting into work, and I've just been taking a quick break. But we're getting into it. And Riley, once again, is that a donut? I like donuts. Thank you very much, Riley. Mark citing Eliota. Eliota, goodness gracious. Eliota is a absolutely ridiculous activist from way back who is utterly convinced that there is white supremacy at basically every level of the system. Honestly, I listened to just he made a full-on video responding to me once back when the whole they had the designated space for like Māori and Pacifica at Auckland University, and it was just a reply of ad hominem and misrepresentation and abuse, quite frankly. Absolutely no substance. All of his views are just crazy, borderline far left ideological talking points. Nothing in much substance to be found from Eliota at all. What is the Māori role? So the Māori electoral role. So when we go and have elections, either at local or central government level, we have two roles, the general role and the Māori role. So the Māori role have different electorate seats. So they currently have 7, and then the remainder of the electorate seats up for grabs are on the general role. The Māori role is set up so that Māori have basically mandated representation, that only Māori can vote for people in those electorate seats. So yeah, that's what the Māori role is. And that's why it's Pāti Māori in Parliament, because they won 6 of the 7 Māori electorate seats, gaining them this sort of power. Unfortunately, they are just well, not popular on the general to win any of those seats because they are radicals, they are extremists. So, you know, that it's essentially a DEI. It's nonsense. We've had it for ages, and for a time it was a fair argument as to why it was implemented, but it hasn't had any use for decades. Has had no practical value for decades. Trill Evolve says Māori will prevail. Pākehā don't have the balls to march for anything. Look at state of England. The thing about England right now is that people are being thrown in prison because they are standing up against the nonsense going on in the UK. Thank you very much. So having to go at the UK when they are literally willing to go to prison for saying that they disagree with immigration. I'm being a little bit vague there. But, you know, people are going to prison because they are not accepting the narrative and sharing information that the government does not want them to share. That shows balls. Thank you very much. And what do we have? We had just here a Pākehā bloke getting assaulted by a Māori who was marching for this whole movement, and then being assaulted by the police for being assaulted. Ridiculous. What we got going here? You see this? Ministry of Health signals tighter controls on puberty blockers for adolescents. Of course, Simon Anderson was not happy with that, was he? Shout out to Simon. Sure, he'll be streaming again. Either, I suspect, tomorrow or Sunday. Not sure. Go follow him. What else we got? Nothing too dramatic. Actually, here's a good question. Which ministry should NZ axe? Ministry of Defence, I think we can keep that. Ministry of Education. Hey, there's an argument. Where we could just move to an education model that's, you know, let's say region by region. Now, we're a small enough country where I think we can get away with having a Ministry of Education, but we just need to simplify all of this stuff. I think for a lot of these, it's less we need to cut them out together, but we need to dramatically reduce the, you know, what they're responsible for. Foreign affairs and trade, we need that. Health, I mean, I think there's merit to having a private system that's easily accessible if we want to, but whatever. A Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, I mean, all of these things, many of these things are needed, but whether or not they are needed to the levels in which they're being utilised at this point is what's probably most important to consider. Ministry of Justice needed. Ministry of Māori Development, get rid of it. Get rid of it. We do not need that shit. Ministry of Social Development, that is a long-term get rid of it, in my opinion. That's a long-term one. I think you can definitely move that to a local level in the long term. Of course, you'd need the entire restructuring of the system to facilitate that. Ministry of Transport, I mean, of course, Customs Service, Security Intelligence Service, Oranga Tamariki, scrap it and start again, in my opinion. Public Service Commission, Serious Fraud Office, Social Investment Agency, Statistics, the Treasury. Like, which of these would you get rid of? Department of Conservation, Corrections, Internal Affairs, Prime Minister and Cabinet, Education Review Office, Communications Security Bureau, Inland Revenue. Get rid of it. Who said that? Culture and Heritage, Land Information, Pacific Peoples, get rid of it. Primary Industries, the Environment Ministry for Women, get rid of it. They don't even know what women are, so why bother having it? Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, Ministry of Defence, Education. There we go. We get back to there. But there's many of these where there's probably a lot to cut out. A lot to cut out. You don't necessarily have to get rid of them full stop though. But you can devolve, I think, a lot of the responsibilities in here to local government. But of course, you would need to really change how we view and the emphasis that we place on local government. Phil says, we used to have a great education system. Then in the late 90s, we moved toward lower standards. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I look at the standards now compared to even 10 years ago. It's absolutely insane. Someone says, you personally might want to get rid of the Ministry of Justice. Without the Ministry of Justice, there is no justice. Well, yeah, I would say without the Ministry of Justice, there is, broadly speaking, the inability to effect widespread justice in a just manner. Now, there's a lot of issues with the Ministry of Justice, but those can actually be resolved if the right people are in there to resolve them. DJ Jizzinator, crikey dick. Do you not understand that we are a country moving forward from a very brutal colonization? Brutal colonization. I would recommend going to a country that actually dealt with a brutal colonization. New Zealand is not an example of that. In fact, the pre-actual colonization period was far more brutal than the pre-1840 period was far more brutal than the post-1840 period. For Māori, at least, in terms of deaths. So, yeah, let's not go there. Where's the Ministry of Pākehā Development? Well, exactly. How are we going to develop all of these precious young future politicians and workers and whatnot? Mark.co.nz said it's in England. That's where the Ministry of Pākehā Development is. Actors scared of the fact that the haka made the whole world aware of the situation. Actually, this is the thing: is you guys on the left are in enough of an echo chamber most of the time that you don't actually understand that the majority of the world is actually laughing at us. And what it has done actually is exposed just how ludicrous New Zealand is with respect to race relations and indigenous laws and rights and so forth, that it's actually allowing places like the US to reference New Zealand as something not to head towards. So, for example, they interpret a lot of our stuff with treaty settlements and stuff like that as reparations. They look at us. They look at the haka in the parliament and they laugh at it. They're saying this is just not how it's done. This is savage, animalistic behavior. The vast majority of the discourse on this matter that you'll find is negative, except in your left wing echo chambers. The vast majority is negative the world over. Teasy says, can I have a shout out? Trump 2024. Trump 2020 everything. Honestly. Let's just have a lineage of Trumps for the next 30 years as far as I'm concerned. Well, we'll give Vance 8 years first. Let's do that. AV Link says, using savage and animalistic when talking about Māori, just tell us how you really feel. I wasn't referencing how I think. I was acknowledging how that kind of behavior was being interpreted by people overseas. It's just a fact. Again, see, this is what the left does. They take words you say, take them out of context, because they lack any substance and credibility. Because Phil says, yes, Americans and English generally ridicule the hikoi, the words savage and backwards coming up a lot. Exactly. That's just the general sense of it. You get echo chambers, but outside of the echo chambers, it's pretty clear that we are a laughing stock of the world right now because of those clowns. Phil also said, NZ is the exception that proves the rule that colonization was typically brutal and exploitative. Yep, I agree. But this was by no means. New Zealand was by no means an example of a brutal, exploitative colonization process. Wasn't great, sure, but it was consistent with the times, and in the context of the times, it was very tame. Yeah, of course, as Phil says, there were, of course, political commentators who saw it positively, but I'm sure you can probably imagine which ones those were. But yeah. Anyways, people, I think I'm gonna about wrap it up. I'll just kind of respond to any quick chats as I see them quickly. But yeah, it's been a good hour and a half or so. I'll try and be back on and do another stream next week. I'm probably not available till Thursday, Friday again, so we'll see what happens. I'll try and break this up if I get the chance as well, and upload them individually just so it's a little bit easier for future reference. If people miss any sections, I'll try and kind of, usually I've got kind of bits that I can cut up that are relevant to certain topics. So keep an eye out for that over on YouTube at least. Big Shaunsey Centre Rose. Interesting. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Trill Evolve, he's running after the savage animal comment. Not at all. I was always planning to get off at about 6:30. In fact, I even referenced that I was going to wrap it up soon, well before that comment. Phil says, thanks for the entertainment and thoughts, Eric. Love your content. Well done. Thank you, Phil. Appreciate you joining in for pretty much the entirety of it. Again, thank you, Eric, says Matthew. Appreciate all of you coming along and hanging out. I do it for the funds. Hopefully I went over enough important stuff, I suppose. Went over enough information that's important. Because that's what I'm here to do. Help keep the conversation going. Shaunsey Centre, whatever that is, appreciate it. But anyways, I'll chuck the music back on. Let's do that.
Light work with the bass on the track, on my face in the back like I'm taking a slap. I need a drink, but it's straight from the tap. And I'm hating the slack, couple man slide around like they hate in the gaff. Please stop talking that trash, cause the vibes in the front all the way to the back. heavy is that? Light work with the bass on the track, on my face to the back like I'm taking a slap. I need a drink, but it's straight from the tap. And I'm hating the slack, couple man slung around like they hate in the gaff. Please stop talking that trash, cause the vibes in the front all the way to the back. Stay in the house. Lock the door.
Wicked is the price. Why'd you run and hide? You can call me